Hey everybody, HomeSliceHenry here, and in today's video I'm going to be showcasing a brand new Master League build for me, and that is my level 50 Perfect IV TERRAKION. TERRAKION definitely feels like the forgotten sword of justice. Virizion and Cobalion are everywhere in the Ultra League, but TERRAKION doesn't really get much love. At level 50, it gets the 4181 CP, and in the Master League, it's a pretty cool core breaker, as it can not only defeat Dialga, but just about any flying type that you'll run into. So without further ado, let's hop into the matches, and let's check out level 50 TERRAKION in action in the Master League. Hopping into the first match, picking up an amazing lead, Florges into Yveltal. Opponent is going to save switch into a Snarl Zacian, and they're actually core broken by the Florges. I'm staying in with the Florges. I'm perfectly fine with playing out this matchup, as ideally I would love to get that Yveltal aligned onto the TERRAKION in the endgame. My opponent is going to let the Moonblast through, they fire off the Play Rough, I'm going to farm up, and now I can go for the Disarming Voice. Disarming Voice is a foul play clone, so it is a pretty solid move. Opponent is going to no shield, and that actually does enough to get the KO. Opponent can't really afford to send in Yveltal here, so instead they're going to send in their final Pokemon, which is Xerneas. I decide to bait. My opponent has already seen that Moonblast does a pretty solid amount of damage, and they shield the Disarming Voice. They're looking to massively overfarm. I make it to the Moonblast, and they're now at 100 energy. It's pretty tough to go for a Geomancy farm down, so they're actually just going to fire off their energy. They go for the cheaper close combat, but they're now debuffed. I'm going to send in Reshiram. One thing I love about Reshiram is it takes neutral damage from fairy moves, so I can withstand the Moonblast, and when they look to switch, I can send in TERRAKION. TERRAKION farming up energy, and I can tank an Oblivion Wing here. That's not going to be a problem. Oblivion Wing will hit for neutral damage, and now I'm looking to farm up. I'm going for the Rock Slide, and Rock Slide is going to hurt. TERRAKION has a pretty nice attack stat that does massive damage to Yveltal, and I'm firing off this Sacred Sword just to prevent them from making it to an additional move. Down goes Yveltal, back in comes the Xerneas. Xerneas farming up energy, but I'm able to make it to the Rock Slide, and this Rock Slide is essential as it will put them into a range where I can easily KO with a Fusion Flare. I'm able to make it to a Sacred Sword as well. This is not quite going to KO, but it will get them low. I try and go for the Dragon Breath snipe with the Reshiram. Unfortunately, I'm going to have to use at least one shield in this match, but we're still able to get the win. We've got a problem in the next match as I lead Florges into Groudon. Groudon beats this entire team, but this I feel like is a pretty good example of even if you have a Pokemon that beats your entire team, you can work together to sometimes overcome it and still get a win. Like Groudon straight up beats the entire team, but the entire team can still hit Groudon for at least neutral damage. They go for the Precipice Blades, that does a ton of damage, and interestingly enough, my opponent does not go for the CMP tie there. They let the Disarming Voice through, I farm up, I switch into the Reshiram trying to snipe. I thought they reacted in time to be able to fire off the Precipice Blades, but they didn't. They only went for the Fire Punch, so unfortunately, my attempt at a catch doesn't really end up working out. They send in Mewtwo, and I'm very happy to see Mewtwo here. Mewtwo, of course, would absolutely shred TERRAKION in the back. I'm farming up, and I'm firing off the Fusion Flare one turn before they make it to Psystrike. Fusion Flare will be shielded. My opponent goes for the Psystrike right away. This Dragon Breath damage is extremely valuable, so I will commit a shield. Opponent in the back, they have Ho-Oh. Switch timer is up, and in comes TERRAKION. TERRAKION, not the tankiest around, but Rock Slide will absolutely crush Ho-Oh. They go for the Sacred Fire, looking for the debuff. It does not happen, and now my opponent has an interesting choice to make. Do they want to keep the Ho-Oh? They do not. The anti-aircraft technology from TERRAKION comes through, and Rock Slide knocks Ho-Oh out of the sky. Rock Slide will be shielded by the Mewtwo. Mewtwo farming up, and I'm able to make it to a Sacred Sword. Sacred Sword does not KO, but it puts them into a range where I can farm them down with the Florges. My Florges is very low, but their only hope is basically just to try and go for a farm down, and they're not going to be able to get there. I'm able to make it to the Disarming Voice. Disarming Voice will KO the Mewtwo, and they lose quite a bit of energy. Moving to the next match, leading Florges into Zacian. We'll have to see the fast move on this Zacian. Are they running Snarl? No, they are not. They are running Quick Attack. If they're running Quick Attack, then they're probably running Wild Charge and Close Combat. And I can tell that by the fact that they're waiting for me to throw first. So I am going to fire off the Moonblast here. I'm going to switch into the Reshiram. And the question is, did my opponent react fast enough? Did they react in time to throw the Close Combat? No, they went for the Wild Charge, and in comes Dialga. Dialga looking for the farm down. I do have the best buddy boost active on Reshiram, which means I do 1 extra damage per Dragon Breath to Dialga compared to the non-best buddy. That's very useful, as this puts it just about into Moonblast range. I can send in the Florges, they're firing off the Iron Head right away, that's perfectly fine, and now I can look to overfarm with the Florges. Here, I definitely could have overfarmed more. Looking back on it, that's definitely a misplay on my part. I go for the Moonblast, down goes Dialga, back in comes the Zacian. I'm farming up, trying to make it to the Disarming Voice, but my opponent is going to make the move first. Wild Charge gets Florges low, but it does not get the KO. I'm firing off this Disarming Voice. Disarming Voice will be shielded. They're firing off more energy, and I'm just going to let this go. I'm saving the shield for TERRAKION. Let's see what my opponent has in the back. In the back, it's Rayquaza. Rayquaza will get outpaced because, again, switching takes a turn. I make the Rock Slide. That is massive, super effective damage. Again, TERRAKION is just absolutely devastating these flyers in the back. I tank the Breaking Swipe. I look for the farm down, but here I got worried. I went for the Sacred Sword. I didn't have to. I could have made the farm down, but I was a little worried about my opponent living on 1. In hindsight, I could have just farmed down, but either way, we're still going to get the win, as despite the debuff, Rock Slide will be more than enough to get rid of Zacian. We see more fairies on the lead in the next match as I lead Florges into Xerneas. This team could very easily be run with Xerneas. However, I just really enjoy getting to use Florges. Florges, of course, is a lot more limited in terms of coverage. It doesn't have the anti-steal moves like something like Xerneas does, but I wanted to run something more off-meta, and I had quite a lot of fun with it. My opponent does get the Moonblast debuff, which is a bit awkward. They fire off their energy, but they're short of a Moonblast. And I researched this matchup on PvPoke prior. If they go for the close combat, Florges lives on like 1 HP. I can make the Disarming Voice and win the zeros, or in this case, grab a shield from my opponent. That was a little bit of matchup research that I did prior to battling that ended up helping out so much in this matchup. I'm going to shield once. I'm fine with taking a move and farming down. My opponent tries for another Moonblast, but they do not get there. I have so much energy on Reshiram. My opponent sends in their own TERRAKION, and I'm not baiting. I'm going straight for the Draco Meteor. Draco Meteor gets the one shot in the back. It's Zarude, and now I can send in TERRAKION. TERRAKION is going to be taking super effective damage here as my opponent fires off the Power Whip, so I will commit a shield. And now I'm at the back-to-back Sacred Swords, so this game is just over. I fire off the Sacred Sword, opponent lets it go. This is honestly a surprisingly low level Zarude. I believe that's only around level 40, but either way, we were in a very good position with having Reshiram and having the TERRAKION in the back. We are now 3 for 3 on fairy leads as I lead into a quick attack Zacian. As before, they're probably running Wild Charge and waiting for me to throw, so I go for the Moonblast and I get the catch onto Reshi. This way, I waste their energy. I've already done a ton of damage, and my opponent is now going to send in Dialga. Dialga looking for the farm down. Again, that 1 extra damage per Dragon Breath is really nice here, thanks to the best buddy on Reshiram, as that means, again, I can get it into Moonblast range for Florges. I'm going to wait the clock. I'm going to send in Florges. I do want to keep Florges healthy, so I will commit a shield. Iron Head would do quite a lot of damage, and I know that I'm still not in a range where a Wild Charge can KO. And here, I actually learned from the mistakes of the previous match, and I overfarm a lot more. I go for the Moonblast. That gets the KO. They can send in the Zacian, but I'm still not in a range where a Wild Charge will be lethal. They're firing off their energy, perfectly fine by me. Wild Charge gets the Florges low, but I make the Disarming Voice, and they have a choice to make. Commit the final shield or lose to Florges. They let it go. In the back, it's Yveltal, and again, in comes TERRAKION, and we're looking at a 5-0 here. If they farm up to a potential Focus Blast, I will respect it. I go for the Rock Slide, and they will commit the shield. They easily have enough for the blast. I commit the shield, and it is the Focus Blast, so that's an absolutely massive shield. And now I can fire off the Rock Slide. Rock Slide, massive super effective damage onto Yveltal. Yveltal gets double kicked down, and that will secure the 5-0 set with my brand new Master League TERRAKION. And now I'll be showcasing some miscellaneous battles from the other 2 sets that I did with the team. I pick up a pretty okay lead in the next match as I lead Florges into Dialga. Florges is able to win the zeros versus Dialga, so that's exactly my plan. If my opponent no shields, I'm fine with playing out the zeros, but unfortunately, my opponent will actually elect to commit a shield. This does make things a bit uncomfortable. They go for the Iron Head, and I'm going for the Moonblast. I don't really want to get farmed down here, as Dialga will get quite a lot of energy, so I decide to send in Reshiram. Reshiram looking for the farm down opponent, now going to send in Lugia. Dragon Tails hitting for super effective damage. I'm farming up with the Reshiram, and I'm full sending the Draco. I have a shield advantage, so I'm not going to bait. Draco Meteor connects. Lugia looking for the farm down, but they get greedy. I make the Fusion Flare, and even though this is double debuffed, they have to shield if they want to keep the energy. Even though my Florges is extremely low HP here, my opponent is going to have a difficult time Dragon Tailing down, and they're forced to throw energy. They're only going to throw a Sky Attack, but in my view, it's still a win. I'm able to force energy, I can send in Terrakion, and Terrakion is looking for the double kick farm down. I will commit the shield, opponent full sends the Aero Blast, they send in Dialga, and Dialga is going to be able to grab my final shield. So I'll have no shields remaining, but I have a massive amount of energy. Let's see, what do they have in the back? We know they have the 1 HP Lugia, the final Pokemon, it's Kyogre, and this is looking tough. This was going to all come down to, do I win CMP over Kyogre? I'm at the back-to-back Sacred Swords, but my opponent now has the energy for a Surf. Who wins CMP? Terrakion versus Kyogre, and Kyogre wins CMP. Surf takes down Terrakion, and we lose a heartbreaking game. We get a chance for redemption in the next match, leading Florges into another Dialga. Same game plan as before. My goal is to try and play out the zeros. If my opponent decides to shield, I'll land a Moonblast and then safe switch into the Reshiram. I'm firing off the Moonblast. Opponent this time elects not to shield. That's quite nice for me. They're going for the Iron Head, and I can let this go. This is another matchup that I was looking into, and I learned that I am actually able to go for a Disarming Voice and Fairy Wind farm down. So I can leave with some energy and potentially make it to a move versus whatever my opponent decides to send in. They send in Zacian, and I'm able to make it to the last second Disarming Voice. This is very valuable damage, as it puts that Zacian firmly into Fusion Flare range for the Reshiram. I send in Reshiram. Reshiram, of course, these Dragon Breaths do absolutely nothing due to the double resist from the Fairy typing. They go for the Play Rough. That does quite a lot of damage, but again, that's why I love the typing on Reshiram. Able to tank those Fairy moves since they're only hitting for neutral. Fusion Flare is shielded. My opponent farming up energy, and I have a choice to make. Do I save 2 shields for Terrakion? No. I commit the shield. They went for the close combat. My opponent now going to send in Giratina, and this is looking tough. As Giratina, not something Terrakion wants to see in the back. I go for the Fusion Flare bait. I get the shield. I make it to the Fusion Flare. This is resisted, but I just need whatever damage I can get. And now, in comes Terrakion. Terrakion, I know I'm going to have to take one, so I'm going to let this go. It's the Shadow Ball. I continue to farm up with the Terrakion. Opponent firing off energy. My only hope is that I live the Ominous Wind. And I do. I'm going for the Rock Slide. This should be lethal. And then the question is, can I withstand the fast move damage from the Zacian? In comes the Zacian. Terrakion makes it to the Sacred Sword. This is resisted. They're low HP. Will it KO? Yes, it will. And Terrakion, against all odds, defeats Zacian. We see a tough lead in the next match, Florges into Mewtwo. This is just a straight up losing matchup for Florges. Mewtwo, its pacing is just absolutely unreal, and both of us need 2 moves to get the KO, and my opponent gets to theirs way faster than I get to mine. And to add insult to injury, they shield the nuke, they shield up the Moonblast, and that's really unfortunate. They're going to be firing off a Psystrike. I tank one, I shield one, and I need to land a Moonblast. I farm up, I wait a turn to make sure that they don't catch, and I go for the Moonblast. My opponent can overfarm here a decent amount, but they actually make, in my view, a bit of a misplay. They don't overfarm. Fairy Wind is not threatening. They very easily could have farmed up close to another Psystrike, as now I can look to farm them down with the Reshiram. My opponent does not want to let that happen, so they're going to pivot into Xerneas. And I'm firing off this Fusion Flare. Fusion Flare does quite a lot of damage. Xerneas is going to no shield. 100 energy is reached for my opponent, so it's time to throw. They go for the close combat. I let that through. I'm going for the Fusion Flare, and they're debuffed. Do they want to keep this Xerneas alive? Yes, they do. They will commit the shield. They fire their energy right away, and I'm going to let this go. I guess I'm trusting in Terrakion to win this game. Terrakion has been feasting on those backline flyers all day. Let's see, can it do it one more time? I shield the close combat in the back. It's a Zygarde, and there's just nothing I can do. Once the Florges was gone, I have nothing for the Zygarde, and I resign the match. Hopping into the final match, we see a Nightmare lead, Florges into Ho-Oh. I throw one Fairy Wind, save switch into Reshiram, my opponent throws 2 Incinerates, and then sends in their Dialga. I have a pretty big energy head start here. I make it to Fusion Flare number 1, they commit the shield, Dialga committing to the farm down, but Reshiram will not be denied, making it to Fusion Flare number 2, opponent lets it go, and Reshiram wins switch. In comes Ho-Oh, they get the Incinerate down, they leave with a ton of energy, but Ho-Oh meet TERRAKION. They have quite a bit of energy, I commit the shield, it's the Sacred Fire, I'm farming up, and I'm able to outpace by 1 turn, making it to the Rock Slide before they make it to the Brave Bird. Rock Slide will be shielded up by my opponent, they're farming up energy, in comes Zekrom, I bank the Rock Slide for later, and now I'm in a winning position. Zekrom can fire off their energy, but it's not going to matter. Florges will be able to get rid of the Zekrom, and then I have the Rock Slide loaded to knock Ho-Oh out of the sky. Moonblast leaves them with a small amount of HP. Florges gets the farm down. Ho-Oh throws energy, but at this point the writing is on the wall for this one. Sacred Fire gets the KO. In comes TERRAKION one final time, knocking a flying type out of the sky, and that is a good game. All in all, XL TERRAKION was a lot more fun than I expected. It's a really interesting core breaker to the Ho-Oh Dialga core, which honestly, it feels like there's not a lot of things that break. So TERRAKION, definitely more of an anti-meta pick, but I think it does have a lot of potential. There are, of course, its bad matchups. It really doesn't enjoy going up against the Fairies, Giratina Origin, Mewtwo, the Primals, and those weaknesses are part of what makes it more anti-meta than meta, but specifically when it comes to the Dialga plus Flyer core, which is quite common, TERRAKION excels, and it can put in a tremendous amount of work. Anyways, thank you guys so much for watching. If you're enjoying the content, make sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't. And a special thank you as always to our members here on YouTube. The support you guys provide is sincerely appreciated, so thank you guys oh so very much. And until next time, I've been HomeSliceHenry.